Hey everybody, I'm JJSF1987, a writer and blogger. To see my latest posts and to follow me also, and to help contribute to this channel on Patreon. The link I will put in the description. It is patreon.com/JJSF1987, and the blog's link is JJSF1987.com. Anyway, two things that are going into this video. Number one, North Korea. Well, looks like that Donald is planning to launch a preemptive strike on North Korea in mid-November if it doesn't comply with his demands. I would not be surprised by this, and I certainly don't want this to happen. However, I'm not gonna just simply, but I also can't overly oppose it either, because we would be basically rewarding bad behavior, and it would basically send the signal to any other misbehaving power that their misbehavior will get them what they want. This is about laying down the law, and Trump is right to be doing this. So in this instance, yeah, I am going to be kind of defending the president, because a lot of what he's talking about, like the strategic patience and such, well, first of all, declaring the era of strategic patience closed was the right move to do, because it sends a signal to Pyongyang, and specifically to Kim Jong-Un, that we're not going to let him hold us hostage anymore. And at this point, even though he's kind of sort of saying like, yeah, well, we'll support going to diplomacy, blah, 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 blah. That's primarily, look, we should keep the option of diplomacy open in some of this. But I would say that window is, if there's somebody else who can keep that window open, great. But, and yeah, there is a button here. But there's a very, I would say, almost confirmed consensus now between Washington and Pyongyang that diplomacy, they will not engage in any more diplomacy, not with each other or not with the other partner states. Washington is not interested in negotiating, not anymore. And Trump is right to say that we're no longer going to negotiate with them, and that if they do anything, we will basically blow them back to the Stone Age, which is where they belong. Not the North Korean, as the not all the people that live in North Korea. No, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the leadership, the Kim regime in particular. But, and here's another thing. Trump making those nuclear threats has done something that no other president has been able to get. China, look at what China's doing. China right now realizes that its trade relations with us are in very massive jeopardy here. And they will do practically anything just to keep those relations open. And what is that going to do for them in return? The people, well, what that's going to do for them, for us, it gives us more economic incentives to sort of entreat them further. What they're good, if they, it's getting to the point where they're starting to I would say starting to recognize in planning and doing the planning now for a long-term down payment just to keep their trade relations with us. And what is that down payment going to be in terms of investing in better relations? Coughing up the Kim regime. Look, they don't want our weapons. They don't want our troops. They don't want that on the Korean Peninsula. To them, it's a direct threat. They don't want them right at their border. But they're also not willing to allow a neighboring country continue to harm their trade relations. So, if anything, this is a really good time for China to show that it is very serious about maintaining some level of regional stability and the fact that it is committed to upholding international law. And that is one thing that will definitely happen, is that they don't want to deal with the Kim regime anymore. And I can assure you, Putin's Russia, they don't want to either. Let me put it this way. Putin's Russia and China, at this point, they don't want any more U.S. weapons, any sort of U.S. military hardware right up at their border. But they also understand that that if they don't get rid of the Kim regime, it's going to force a very heavy U.S. military strike. Now, whether it happens in mid-November or whenever, we need to be ready, and also we need to make sure that Congress understands that we should not resort to nuclear war first. Don't deploy them unless you really, really have to. Luckily, we have a weapon in our arsenal that is big enough and can actually do even more damage than a lot of nuclear weapons, for that matter, without all the side effects, without all the radiation side effects, basically. It's nicknamed the mother of all bombs. Now, I'm pretty sure that Russia and China are going to try to come up with something that will keep they'll try to come up with something to help at least try to not to let it escalate even more. Basically, Trump forced their hands basically. And they know he's absolutely serious about this. He is not bluffing. Obama wasn't bluffing when he said that the Kim regime would be basically, they would be held accountable, because they were. And think about what had happened, literally. Think about what is happening right now. I mean, Russia at this point is basically Russia's making the point of saying that, look, we don't want any more U.S. military hardware up in the Korean Peninsula. But at this point, it's an evil that we're going to need to live with in the short term. Because these idiots in Pyongyang are going to start World War III. And they don't want that right at their border. But this is both the Russians and the Chinese, for that matter, because they both border North Korea. Anyway, so that's number one. Number two. Really, Don? Are you completely... Are you that stupid? Don't even get me started. And the reason why I'm asking that, actually, I think you all know what. Well, I'll just say it anyway. Trump and the Republicans are thinking about about repealing the ADA in some form or another. That's what I'm saying. Really? I'll have these Republicans, at least these hard right Republicans, know that they will face the biggest pain ever in their history in operating as a political party. They're gonna get their asses handed to them. If they continue with this, they are basically kissing their hold on Congress, or at least partially on Congress. They're basically saying, see you later, do it. The reason I'm raising a big stink about it is, actually, I am disabled myself. Yeah, I'm autistic. I've had it ever since I was born. Yeah, well, there's other things that also come along with it, but I'm not going to... That's for a different video. Anyway, my point is that because I have this developmental, disability that I've been dealing with ever since I was born. For me, it means right now, it means I have to work about 3 times harder just to get through day-to-day life, and it's not exactly a walk in the park either. But I'm not going to bore you with the whole sob story and such, so I'll leave it at that. Now, if any of you have any family, friends, colleagues, anybody that you have some kind of relationship with, ask yourselves this question: how many of them have some kind of disability? And how hard would they have to basically exert themselves just because they are not able to do things by themselves very easily? What are they going to do without all the accommodations that they're basically that is basically provided to them by law? What is that going to do? It's going to make it so this way they can't do something like go to the grocery store, if they're in a wheelchair, for example. Or, as in my case, having a hard time getting out of the house because of the fact that, again, a lot of that also has to do with a lot of, keeping up and making sure things get accomplished. For example, on my end, which, again, the lack of executive functioning is part of being on the autism spectrum. It's just a hand. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's just something I was dealt. Anyway, so that's in my case. Well, think about all those who are mentally disabled. Where are they going to go? Or actually, no, scratch that question. We all more or less know where they're going to end up going, to some form, in some form or another. The real question is, how many or how likely is it that some of the people that are, you're going to run into somebody who's mentally disabled and has a propensity for violence. And if that is basically, and they're out on the streets basically, what are you going to do? You can't do much. Not unless you get other people together and get on the phone to your representatives and your senators in Congress and tell them to fight like heck to make sure this does not happen. And the reason why I'm talking to you, Don, in particular, let me ask you something. How would you like to be legacied as the president that caused the worst suicide epidemic in U.S. history? How would you be able to live with that as part of your presidential legacy? Or, for that matter, seeing people who are disabled basically being shut out of everyday life. I get it. You want to save a pretty penny by getting rid of all these stupid, at least in your mind, all these stupid regulations for people who are disabled. So this way people who are able-bodied at the inconvenience of the able-bodied. Look, I get it. But that's not enough of a justification to get rid of the ADA. You do that, you're basically asking to be recalled in 2020. I can guarantee you that right now. In some form or another. Basically, what he's asking for is to basically be cut off. Actually, another way that... No, actually, scratch that. Here's a better way to put it. You're going to have your legislative program agenda basically cut off at the knees. So if you want to get anything done, you got to basically get rid of these extreme policies that you're trying to implement. A lot of them are doing a lot more harm than good. Yeah, it may be to the 12% or so, especially the donors who are trying to basically get their biggest tax break and such and get rid of any and all kinds of regulations. I would say also, let me say this. If they're going to go after the Disability Act, that's just the beginning. They're going to find some way to get rid of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act and all other forms of civil rights legislation that was actually enacted into law. They're going to find some way to get rid of it. I mean, and if Trump tries to do so by forcing the Supreme Court to rule it unconstitutional, which they are going to do in some form or another, that's just going to bring absolute chaos everywhere. Anyway, I'm going to cut it here. I'm JGSF1987.com, and if you watch this, thanks for doing so, and go ahead and subscribe if you think that if you're interested in any of these other videos, hit subscribe. Anyway, I'm JGSF1987, and I am out of here.